If I were to choose one thing that sets survival games apart from everything else in video games now, it would have to be pacing. It doesn't matter if it's horror, wilderness, or a creative survival sandbox, pacing is the key development difference that will have you shooting, navigating, and experiencing that game differently to any other genre. Time spent looting containers, analyzing your inventory, and however many status bars you have slowly burning down, intermingle with real-time gameplay to create gameplay loops that often demand you to stop, think, plan, and proceed. But does that intent translate? This is Waste a Life, and today we're going to be talking about why PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is a good game, among other things. Survival games would like you to think that there's a definitive weight behind every action you make in their world. The can of beans you crack open in the early game might just be one that you need late into the night, but I'd argue that there's a weightlessness to a lot of experiences to be found in survival games. You wash up on the island, awake from the plane crash, emerge from the downed spacecraft, let loose in the developer's world to grapple head-on with the mechanics at a pace that grinds against anything that could be considered satisfying, slowly ticking a checklist of to-dos that every survival game seems obliged to include. Countless playthroughs, countless games, everything restarted and re-experienced per game for what is ultimately a gameplay loop of diminishing returns. Find the melee weapon, encounter the local wildlife, hit the tree, pick up what the tree dropped, sigh deeply as you open the ever-present crafting system. I could go on for a little while talking about how these games rely so deeply on crafting systems that contribute next to nothing to their games, aside from another deeper set collection of unticked boxes. It feels like the genre performed something of a collective bait and switch on many players, promising deep, developed survival experiences, and eventually delivering janky and undercooked dumpsters of disparate mechanics and unfulfilled potential. There are definitely games that get this collection of mechanics right, oftentimes through the compelling nature of the worlds that they're set in. The Long Dark's stark, uncaring winter wasteland delivers an experience at times so vivid and ferocious it makes wilderness survival almost artistic. The forest's inclusion of unpredictable and bizarre cannibal tribes makes a serviceable base building experience into something more akin to Cannibal Holocaust at times. All that said, I'd argue that the buzz of the survival game genre within the industry has been tempered slightly by so many imitations, so many unoriginal takes on the same concept. When Rust was released at the very tail end of 2013, it garnered most of its goodwill by just basically being a less self-serious take on the genre, naked men gallivanting across its landscape. Through the 7th generation of video game consoles, advanced graphical and animation technology allowed developers and writers of video games to indulge in what some might consider as the blockbusterization of video games. Stories, style, and presentation took precedence, with developers trying to wrangle these new approaches and opportunities for storytelling into meaningful gameplay experiences. And don't get me wrong, the 7th generation was where I basically grew up, but the growing pains shown during that period are obvious. Now though, deep into the 8th generation of consoles and relative PC development, games have exited this honeymoon period of style over substance to return to robust gameplay systems. A fantastic example of this is id Software's 2016 reboot of Doom, an absolute left-field knockout that had more in common with something like Mad Max Fury Road than a lot of other shooters at the time. When Doom is in its element, and it rarely isn't, it presents such an inimitable connection of style, empowerment, pacing, and immediacy that few games can replicate. Few games, but some. Empowerment and immediacy, they're two things that we're going to return to. However, it's been a few minutes now and I haven't even mentioned the game that this video supposedly exists for. And yeah, sorry, but it's gonna be a little bit longer. Let's talk about DayZ. DayZ was released as a standalone game by Czech Republic studio Bohemia Interactive in February of 2013. Prior to that, DayZ and its creator Dean Hall enjoyed the kind of cult status that many janky yet ambitious mods enjoy while they're underground enough to get away with it. But with the release of the standalone game, issues surrounding the stability and moment-to-moment gameplay of the game remain unanswered to this day over 4 years later. To this day, loading up a game in DayZ feels more like an exercise in futility than anything else, and that's fine. I like games that don't hold your hand and expect you to fail and fail again, but DayZ and a lot of the media surrounding it seems so obsessed with talking about the metaphysical effect the game has on its players, even going so far to call it an anti-game, that it forgets to take moment-to-moment gameplay and even make it engaging. Rhythms of play, to quote Noah Gervais, do not exist here, just anxious, monotonous drone, the kind that has you running kilometers trying to escape zombie aggro. I talk about DayZ so much because it does feel that for a time it was truly the face of combat-based survival games. Surpassed in time by others, but always omnipresent in the back of my mind as how things can go wrong. It feels necessary in a way though. An unfulfilled promise that at least made the promise seem intriguing to begin with, to perhaps be made good on by another developer somewhere down the line. So, to revise, pacing. It forms the basis of an experience, but let's add in one more thing, slightly under that, but no less important. Immediacy. And with that, we come to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. This is the blood that pumps through the veins of this game. It could be said that pop culture and by extension popular mainstream video games are in a constant state of perfectionism. Take the mechanics, the experience, the tension, the encounters, the entire gameplay loop, and make it satisfying, make it immediate, make it hit, and make sure that when it hits hard. From the moment you load into a round of Battlegrounds, there are decisions to be made about the course that this match is, hopefully, going to take for you. The fact that players are given an instantaneous choice over how they even want to position themselves within a round of Battlegrounds speaks to the game's clever handling of the next two extremely important elements of why PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is a good game: empowerment and tension. This is often the mixture that so many other games get wrong. DayZ planted its whole gameplay ideology on its supposed ability to cultivate tension, but it fails due to its inability to correctly handle the second element, empowerment. For a period surrounding and following 2010 and the success of horror games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, games had an intense infatuation with the concept of disempowerment. Something that has been seen as a viable gameplay element to this day, and that's good. Amnesia is an incredible game, I'm not here to argue that, but you can't simply remove a player's ability to fight back and assume that your game is now within some category that has transcended the need for meaningful mechanics. Dark Souls is another example of a game that implements disempowerment in a meaningful way, in a way that is so baked into the mechanics and gameplay loop of that game that it became a phenomenon, and rightly so. The method through which PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds handles empowerment can be surmised with one phrase: waste no time. After entering the map alongside your fellow desperate murderers within an aircraft carrier, players are presented with a choice and their first moment of empowerment. When are you going to eject? The map is already sprawled out in front of you, another piece of information presented without comment, but undeniably helpful. So now you must simply choose what your early and mid-game could look like. Do you parachute towards the largest city center with the promise of supplies and early game punch kills drawing you in? Or do you take a gamble on the housing littering the countryside, usually a safer and quieter choice, albeit with a lesser guarantee of high quality equipment? Already, players are expected to be formulating a plan for action. But I haven't even gotten to one of the most brilliant elements of this entire sequence. You can see other players making this choice in real time. Skydiving and shooting off in all directions, you can almost get an early read on what they're planning to do. Even at a numerical level, the amount of players Battlegrounds will pack into any single match makes its intentions abundantly clear, saying, "There are 100 people here. How many of them can you best?" Given that you're able to stay alive, there are numerous opportunities for engaging enemies in each match. Instead of taking things away from the player like most survival games, even to the point of depriving them of people to play against, Battlegrounds says, "Fuck that, here's 100 ways to die. Go find a gun." Battlegrounds' marriage of empowerment and immediacy continues all the way through the early and mid-game. Looting your way through the map, you'll find guns and supplies aplenty, the awareness of eventual conflict hanging over your head as you do your best to prepare as the omnipresent arena restriction timer ticks down. To say the marriage is set in stone, though, would do a disservice to the elastic nature of the gameplay loop Battlegrounds establishes, owed to the implementation of a constantly tightening ring in which you can foreseeably survive. Entering this blue zone equals death in mere seconds after a while. Battlegrounds is going to force you into situations in which you must put your empowerment to the test to back up how you fared in the early game with the frenetic and millisecond-based gameplay of the late game. This forms the basis for tension in the game. You know you have to move and be decisive to survive, and you sure as hell know that every other single person on this island currently is preparing with that exact understanding in mind. Battlegrounds' internal logic of immediate action creates a loop of tension that is constantly reaching a boiling point and returning to a simmer. This tension is often expressed in the game's use of sound, another calling card of the disempowerment movement. Top-notch sound design serves as a standout when it comes to the audio-visual design of Battlegrounds. Gunshots pop ominously in the distance or crackle startlingly close. You can hear sniper rifles disturbing the speed of sound between the hilltops. Footsteps on the floorboards above you in a secluded cabin can turn a routine scavenge into a heart-pounding waiting game. Your empowerment may increase during your initial encounters with supplies and under-equipped players, but then the immediacy grows, forces itself upon you, and your empowerment is met and sometimes annulled entirely by other players. This culminates to the incredible feeling of a survived firefight once the dust has settled and you've managed to catch your breath. Remember at the start of this video when I said that the thing that defines survival games the most was their pacing? That still stands, but the pacing defined by so many survival games before it made Battlegrounds look around and realize, well, there's a whole lot of nothing going on, huh? And then it airdropped 100 of its players into the mix. Battlegrounds takes the slow burn, the tedious loop, the lack of player interactivity, and it pushes it to a new limit of pacing, forcing you to hit the ground sprinting, find your weapon, and assert yourself in an ever-shrinking world of conflict, victory, and death. Through janky animations, somewhat unpredictable netcode, and other common trappings of the early access phase, this game somehow still manages to grab you by your gut first and your nerves second, never letting go for a moment. By unifying its ruthlessly immediate action with the admittedly impressive scope of vast survival environments, it cements itself as one of the best multiplayer experiences I have ever had, and quite possibly the beginning of a new way of understanding survival games. Thanks for watching. Before I finish this video, I want to acknowledge a few other content creators who, while watching the video, viewers could easily draw parallels with. Hamish Black of Writing on Games released a video titled Why PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds Violence is Important in late May. While Black's work analyzes some of the things I spoke about here, I wrote this script prior to seeing that video. And while his thoughts are interesting and true, they don't have a bearing on this script. That said, if you want more PUBG Think Peace content, I would highly recommend his video. Outside of Writing on Games, I also want to acknowledge Heavy Eye's video, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and the Importance of Early Access, especially for his thoughts on forced progression and the early access phenomenon in gaming. Again, his video didn't impact this script, but I want to pay it some mind. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you'd consider liking and subscribing, sharing with your friends, or if you think I'm an idiot, making a counter video so we can get some fresh YouTube drama going. I'm a new content creator here, so all thoughts are appreciated, which can be left down in the comments. Thank you.